Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome to both of you. As ever, we kick off with the front pages. So let's start with The Guardian, reporting on the 12-hour operation to rescue 8 people from a stuck cable car in a remote valley in Pakistan. The lead story, as you can see, a hospital accused of fobbing off parents of Letby murder victims. The Express leads with a potential trade deal between the UK and India as Business Secretary Kemi Badenoch talks up the plans. The Daily Mirror interviews the parents of a girl who almost died in an attack in 1991 by the nurse Beverly Allett. They say they've been left traumatised by the Lucy Letby case. The Telegraph reports that the government has been blocked from overruling the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone, the ULEZ zone. A new world order, the FT leads on Chinese President Xi Jinping being honoured in South Africa as the BRICS summit gets underway. The Eye leads on a fertility landmark as surgeons perform the UK's first womb transplant. That's also on the front of the Daily Mail. Their headline, Woman Gives Womb to Her Sister in a UK Transplant First. And The Eye, which called it a sister's gift. The Daily Star brings us more meteorological misery as it predicts more humid temperatures will bring an invasion of flies. Well, that's cheery, isn't it? Anyway, so don't forget, scan that QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme. You can check out the front pages of the papers while you watch us. So let's bring in our guests then. Henry and Sonia. Sonia, let's kick off with you in the Daily Mail, if you don't mind. A story leading a number of newspapers. A UK first. A woman gives her womb to her sister in a transplant breakthrough here.
Yes, absolutely. So as you've just said, Anna, this is the first time such a transplant has taken place in the UK. There have been around 90 of these transplants internationally. Viewers may remember that it happened, the first one in Australia happened earlier this year. This is a very exciting development in fertility medicine. What happens is that a donor who's normally already had their children, usually got a personal connection to the person they're donating to, can donate their womb, the whole organ. In this case, it was from an older sister, aged 40, to her younger sister, aged 34, who suffers from a rare medical condition that means that she doesn't have a fully developed womb. And there have been women around the world who, after having had one of these transplants, have been able to successfully carry babies to term. So this is what very much what the 34-year-old younger sister is hoping will happen. And this is a form of fertility treatment. I mean, it's obviously still not going to be for everyone. I think you probably have to have a very strong personal connection to someone to donate your womb in this way, because obviously that might have health implications for you going forwards. But it can help women who can't get pregnant because they've got issues with their own womb, their own uterus. What's quite interesting is that you have to take, it's really major surgery. So it took around 9 hours to take the womb out of the older sister, around 9 hours to put it into the younger sister. Also, I've been reading up about this evening. You have to take immunosuppressants while you've got the womb transplant in you. So it's not a permanent thing. You have it while you conceive your children, and then it will be taken out.
Well, that's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? Because obviously immunosuppressant drugs have a really big impact on people's lives, as we know. So a 17, 18-hour operation, as the Mail puts it. The Eye, which is also leading on this, said each transplant cost £25,000. What is extraordinary about this is the complexity of this. You know, the blood connections, in this major organ, which is supposed to give birth to a child, with the strains that goes in the womb. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it?
It really does feel like science fiction, when you think about medical science and everything else. This is one of the things that maybe I didn't think maybe would ever happen or think about happening. And it's the lifeline it offers people. If you think about it, if you really want children and you do have one of these conditions, and you could adopt, or there are IVF, but IVF is very expensive and actually doesn't have a very high success rate. And this is transformational, because it means that you can potentially, and we, you know, this is early days, we've only been doing these operations for a little while, we haven't seen the long-term health implications or whether there are any other complications, but potentially bear your own children. Now, it is very expensive. It's obviously still early days. There will be questions about how to make this available on the NHS, for example, if eventually it does become a mainstream treatment, or as mainstream as it can be, given how niche it is. And obviously there will be supply issues, because as Sonia said, you do need, I think, probably to have quite strong personal reasons to donate, given the complications of that. But nonetheless, in a world that's absolutely full of bad news, it's really nice to see so many papers splashing on such a hopeful story.
Yes, absolutely. And as you said, more than 90 womb transplants have been carried out internationally, including in Sweden, the US, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, China, the Czech Republic, Brazil, Germany, Serbia and India, with most involving a living donor, somebody who's also generous, as you put it, Sonia. So certainly keep an eye on that. And it's actually an embargoed story, so we'll have more coverage after the embargo from Sky News here as well. So lots more on that to come. In the meantime, I was reading off The Guardian. Henry, you take us through the pictures in The Guardian. 8 saved in Pakistan's Miracle in the Mountains. You know, these young kids who go to school by cable car. It's a much shorter route in this incredibly mountainous area. You know, literally hanging by a thread for hours today.
I mean, I don't even want to think about it too much. It's actually my worst nightmare. You know, whenever you go out, whenever you go to Switzerland, which I've done once or twice, and you get the cable car, I don't like heights. You know, the first time you go on, it goes over one of those cliffs and suddenly you're suspended by what feels like a little bit of rope. The idea of being stuck dangling there for so long is absolutely horrifying. And then you read about the complications. They were taking people off by helicopter, and then there were high winds, so they had to abandon that, meaning that people thought they were going to be rescued, and then they were stuck again. Chilling. And yet, again, a happy ending. It's absolutely fantastic. They managed to get everybody off, including the teacher. And it is remarkable how you have communities like this where which, you know, the only one we've got in the UK, I think, is the Boris Johnson vanity project over the Thames. But there in Pakistan, it's a perfectly sensible mode of transportation when it works.
Yes, and once the helicopter couldn't take off, you know, a zip wire was used, painstakingly bringing everyone to safety, at great risk to themselves, working in darkness, as you can see from these pictures, Sonia.
Absolutely, and I think it's, you know, everyone in Pakistan and elsewhere around the world, because, you know, it's one of those stories that I think people follow closely, regardless of where it is, whether it's local or international. And I think everyone will be breathing a sigh of relief. I've actually been reading up about these cable cars in Pakistan this evening. It wasn't something I was aware of, but it's very common for there to be essentially locally built cable cars, like kind of homemade cable cars. Some of them are made from, you know, the cabs of trucks, for example, and they are quite dangerous. So there have been accidents on them before. Now, the reason that they get built is because you've got very remote communities. The children in this cable car were using it to get to school. It takes a journey that would be a 2-hour walk or a 4-hour drive, you know, because it's a very mountainous region, and turns it into a 4-minute cable car ride. You know, it's just not feasible financially or time-wise for children to get a taxi to their school. So you can see why these cable cars are being used, but there are a lot of calls in Pakistan tonight for the government and, you know, local regulatory agencies to do much more to check on the safety of these cable cars, which are relatively unregulated.
I'm going to move on again, front of the Daily Telegraph now, and the story of the former Met officer Adam Provan, jailed today for 16 years, and the brave woman Lauren Taylor, now 29 years old, who's pictured top right there in the Telegraph on their front page, who's waived her right to anonymity to encourage other victims to come forward. He convicted of raping her and a fellow police officer, with the judge roundly condemning the Met for their handling of that incident, Henry.
Yeah, again, we have a story about the Met where, once again, not only has there been an officer who was using his position to prey on women, but the Met have institutionally covered it up. Every single time one of these stories happens, this man has been jailed for 16 years. He's going to have another 8 after that on licence, which is a heavy sentence. But you read the story, and it's chilling. There was an earlier woman who came forward with complaints, not of rape, but of inappropriate conduct. That was dealt with informally, which obviously means that there was no record of it, and gave officers an excuse to turn a blind eye. And then he used his position to rape not only a female colleague 6 times, but then a then 16-year-old girl. And they found out that he had hundreds, I think over 700 female contacts in his phone. So, I mean, God knows what he would have done if he hadn't eventually been caught. Now, the Met is promising a review again, and it's saying all the right things about stopping predatory officers and having the right checks in place. But it is clearly a deeply institutional problem that these complaints are not taken seriously and that there is a tendency for officers to rally round an officer accused. And I think the most remarkable thing about this story, where one of the victims was a police officer, is when you read the story, it says that they were looking, the police were looking after one of their own. Well, doesn't she count? Why didn't she count? Why is that where their loyalties lay? It's crushingly depressing. It's good that he's got justice. It's extraordinary courage that this woman has waived her right to anonymity, because it is important that people come forward. Because as that earlier dismissed or informally dealt with story shows, even if the complaints aren't as serious as, rape, they can create a pattern of behaviour, they can establish a pattern of behaviour that allows predators to be identified earlier.
Yes, and our crime correspondent Martin Brunt, explaining to us a little earlier that the Met Commissioner had said there'd be 2 or 3 incidents a week involving his officers, but nobody expected one quite so seriously so soon. And this is yet another serious incident where there've been clear failings, Sonia.
I mean, absolutely. What are women supposed to think when you hear about yet another serving officer who used his badge essentially to rape? And, the young woman who's come forward, who is, as Henry says, is so incredibly brave. She's talked about she was 16 at the time. This serving officer told her that he was 22. He was actually double her age, I think, so around 32. And she thought she was safe to go on a date with him because, she knew he was a police officer, and he took her to the woods and raped her. We've had Baroness Louise Casey has done her review into the Met and found, ample evidence of institutional misogyny, racism, homophobia. And as Henry has just said, these issues, this cover-up culture in the Met, where they sort of cover for their own officers, where they don't take instances of this Met officer raped a fellow police officer, but before that he was sending nuisance messages to female colleagues. These signs go ignored and fellow officers cover up. And it's just, sometimes it's just hard to know what to do with an institution like the Met. It feels like it's kind of unreformable because these cultures run very deep. And, you've got to have such a committed leadership to overturn this. And, you just don't see it happening at the moment. And I think it's really, really worrying because the police in this country, they police by consent. And that relationship between the police and the communities they serve and the everyday citizen is so important. And we have to be able to trust our police officers because they've got immense power over our lives. And every time you hear a new story about a police officer abusing their power like this, it raises serious questions both about the red flags but also about who's getting recruited into the police force, because we know that while there are many good men and women who want to serve in our police force, roles that give police officers power over people's lives like this, they do attract abusers.
Okay.
And we know that the police do not have strong enough filters to filter them out when they're recruiting.
Yes, important story. Sorry to cut you off. I just want to squeeze one more in before the break, which is also the front page of the Daily Telegraph. The Telegraph saying it's found out 2 things. One, that if the government tried to block London's ultra-low emission zone, they've been told it would be illegal. The second one, the Telegraph can today disclose that Sadiq Khan's deputy urged scientists to alter a Lancet study that showed London's low emission zone made no difference to children's health. Some quite interesting reporting here in the Telegraph concerning the ultra-low emission zone plans.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we don't have a lot of detail about the attempt to interfere with the nature study, but I mean, that's obviously improper, right? Like, scientific evidence is what it is. You can make the case for the low emission zone on plenty of good grounds without actively trying to interfere with the evidence. And the fact that this has come out, I think, only undermines the Mayor's case. On the government's advice, basically, the government does, in theory, have a power where it could veto parts of the Mayor's transport plan if that is deemed to be in conflict with national policy. Now, when they say it's been blocked, what the government's had is legal advice saying, well, national policy is net zero, right? So where's the conflict going to be? The government can still try. What they've been told by their lawyers is they'll probably lose in court.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, the chief leader writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda, and the deputy editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Welcome to both of you. Sonia, front page of The Times now, a story about a Chinese spy, a single Chinese spy who's using fake LinkedIn profiles to try to lure thousands of British officials. They even have his main alias in this story. So explain what this is about.
Yeah, so it sounds like this spy is incredibly prolific. It's a single spy targeting thousands of people who might have classified information that's relevant to China. So that includes, civil servants, security officials, academics and scientists. And what this spy has been doing has been setting up lots of different profiles under aliases. The story can't reveal his name because it would put UK intelligence, Western intelligence at risk, but he's been targeting them with messages, offering cash for them, revealing things like, candidates for the security services, for employment by the security services, offering things like all expenses paid trips to China in exchange for information. So it really shows the extent to which spy networks are using social media. And, this is at LinkedIn. A lot of people use it for professional reasons, for networking, to kind of make contacts, to get freelance work. And, the spies, as you might expect, and Chinese intelligence are very attuned to that and have been targeting people who might be able to give them information.
Yes. Henry, let's move on to sort of the fallout from the Lucy Letby case. First of all, we've got the Daily Mirror, who interviews a mum and dad whose daughter almost died in an attack by the child-killing nurse Beverly Allett back in 1991. The Times says that senior NHS managers should be regulated in the same way as doctors. And The Guardian says, has the parents of a newborn son who was murdered and his twin poisoned, said they repeatedly tried to meet the hospital's medical director in the Lucy Letby case, but were fobbed off, which they found shameful, increasing calls for a statutory inquiry. So, days later, we're still getting, changes of policy required and further investigations needed.
I mean, I feel like I could almost repeat half of what I said about the Metropolitan Police, right? There's another series of institutional failures. When you read about the Letby story, you read about the medical whistleblowers who tried to come forward, how she was effectively shielded. No, but it is clear that NHS managers did not think she was guilty, but they stymied investigations. They once actually asked one of the doctors to apologise to Lucy Letby. And what the Mirror has is actually, that was pretty much what happened in 1991. The NHS, once again, sort of covering it up. And the really interesting thing about this is all of those doctors, if you think someone's committing a crime, let alone a crime as serious as killing children, you can just go straight to the police, right? You don't need the sign-off of NHS managers. And what's fascinating to me as someone outside is the power of that hierarchy. It's called the medical model, where they felt they had to go through the hospital system. When instead, what we clearly need, bare minimum, one, better management of managers, but two, take the managers out of the system. If staff have safeguarding concerns or let alone concerns about crime, staff should be empowered and encouraged to go directly to the relevant authorities without getting sign-off.
Yes, just a minute left, Sonia, to add your voice to this. Sir Keir Starmer saying there should be a statutory inquiry. Do you get the sense the government might crumble on this?
Yeah, I do. And it's very common, actually, for inquiries to be announced and them to be made statutory later on. We at The Observer called for a statutory inquiry at the weekend in our editorial column. I think it's really important. Statutory inquiries have the power to compel witnesses and evidence. And it's really important that this inquiry has that, because otherwise we may not get at the truth. And this is it's one of the worst things that I've ever read about happening in the NHS. A nurse being allowed to perpetrate murders against premature babies for a full year before she was stopped. There has to be a statutory inquiry. And I agree with the families, actually. And with some of the doctors, we need to look at the regulation of NHS managers, because this is not the first time where whistleblowers have been treated abysmally by the NHS and by NHS management. It's not across the whole NHS, but it's clearly a systemic issue within the NHS.
Yes, indeed. Doctors have the GMC, why don't the bosses? Thank you both very much indeed. Sonia, Henry, thank you.